If you're just coming from my most recent video about Soulrift, I'm so sorry to inform you that is garbage, straight trash, throw it straight into a dumpster. We don't need to look at that anymore, because we can make this thing overpower 100% of the time, and it's absolutely disgusting. Now, the entire time that I've been working on Soulrift, I've been talking to another creator by the name of Lord Saura, and Lord Saura had recently posted a video about Soulrift, but hey, they figured out how to make it overpower all the time without it being super janky. Now, I have basically taken that thing, workshopped it myself, went and looked at their planner and realized, interesting. We basically came to a lot of the same conclusions. But again, shoutouts to Lord Saura, said like, hey, this tech works, Mac. This is where it needs to go next. But what you're currently looking at is basically the exact same Soulrift build, except we figured out how to make it overpower 100% of the time. It has so many amazingly easy ways of fixing any mistakes that you would have made, basically self-solves for its own issues, adds on another 300 to 500 times worth of multiplier, and all of a sudden we are proccing for hundreds of millions of overpowered damage multiple times per bone spirit cast. And if I could actually get ancestral versions of all my gear, better GAs, better masterwork crits, and actually get like a solid set of mechanisms down for this build, it will easily be doing billions of damage per second, all from the safety of effectively unkillable even to these lightning dudes. God, I hate them so much. But the reason why we're able to get this thing to overpower, toss on a bunch of multipliers for overpower damage, scale overpower and fortify, basically just sneak out a ton of huge damage multipliers and additive, is because of pugilistic extinction. These are the runes Yule and Zahn, and what it basically says is every single time that you cast a skill with a cooldown, you gain some offering, and then your next skill that you cast will be guaranteed to both critically strike and overpower. Now, just like every other overpower build in the game, you are going to have to get a little bit used to how this all works together, but luckily, unlike things like Bone Spirit, you're not going to be stuck waiting for Bone Spirit to come off cooldown because you managed to shotgun the thing into a barrel 15 feet away from you. No, in fact, we get to use some similar stuff to like the weird Rakanot's boots tech that I was using like way back in the last PTR, and using corpse tendrils to basically proc cooldowns without ever casting a skill, so you walk into every single fight with an overpower Soulrift that's generating a ton of barrier now that we have redesigned and reimagined the gems that are going into this build. You know what? We're done with the footage. We managed to kill this boss, and I even messed up like 3 or 4 times during this fight and basically sat there doing absolutely nothing because I was so afraid of not finishing the tier 98 dungeon that you're currently looking at. Let's go ahead and jump into the updated gear, the updated paragon, the updated skill tree, and then what you need to understand about what's happening differently in this build. Now, go ahead and use the timestamps below to anything that you are particularly interested in seeing. I'm going to start off with the mechanics of how we get it to overpower, just so that everything else makes sense, because you do just have to learn this one cool little trick, be able to make it work without ever managing to screw it up yourself. The great part about this build is that it continues to be incredibly easy to pilot and has a huge grace window for, even if you do mess up, a ton of time to be able to fix your mistake. But what we're looking at is the particular rune word cooldown on our bar here. This will require us to hit, 14 cooldown skills before we will overpower on the next skill use. So that can be Blood Mist will put it up, that can be actually casting Bone Spirit itself, which is obviously going to go on cooldown as well. That's the primary engine for this. Or, if you're cheeky like me, it's casting corpse tendrils without targeting a body. That's right, this counts as casting a skill with a cooldown, and the moment that I do it this last time and that little white bar goes away, bada bing, bada boom, I get my buff, and now our Soulrift will overpower, but you're not going to see that until you start casting your Bone Spirit itself. Oh, Bone Spirit managed to not crit, and we got it stuck off of cooldown. Just hit Decrepify twice, and bada bing, bada boom, you're casting it again. This build is really fine-tuned at this point, and what it basically means is I have very little wiggle room because the gear that we have in the PTR is just kind of trash. But as you can see, over the entire length of our Soulrift, we're able to be continuously overpower proccing for millions and millions of damage. And it doesn't matter in what combination you cast these cooldown skills. So walking in with a Blood Mist and then using a Corpse Tendrils just to proc it before you hit your ultimate, it doesn't matter how this works for you, you will always get there. And you'll notice that even when I manage to screw up, like if I don't have Corpse Tendrils off of cooldown and I run out of crit chance, you can just automatically reset basically anything by spamming Decrepify. That'll fix Bone Spirit for you. But you put these things together, and that's what you get. Automatic overpowers that are critting 100% of the time, although we already have a 100% chance to crit. And that is a massive damage boost to what we were doing before. To that end as well, we basically get to add on a couple new weapons that are going to gain us access to even more stats that are really good for the build in general, make it overall more efficient for the various engines that we have. I'm just going to touch on the differences in this planner versus the other one, considering I assume if I'm, maybe I'm just patting myself on the back a little bit too much, you've probably already seen the last one, so I don't want to waste your time. Again, the biggest change here for gear-wise is going to be the addition of Blood Moon Breaches. This is going to make it harder to cap armor, so you're going to have to pick up a bit more in the Paragon board, but I've already accounted for that. And if you really want to, you can kind of just ignore that and drink an armor elixir. I don't necessarily recommend it, but it's a cheap and easy way to be able to handle it in case your gear wasn't good enough. You'll notice that we also swap over to a one-handed mace and a focus. The mace is already going to get us overpowered damage, and we're going to basically speed up how quickly we're doing our damage, how quickly we're resetting cooldowns, how quickly we're able to proc all of our various buffs. And on top of that, basically get the exact same combination of stats that we normally would, but with better stats on the offhand. Offhands have been severely buffed walking into Season 6. You'll notice that the lucky hit chance that they grant is now 38%. There's like a non-0% chance that is like not intended and that they might revert it a little bit, but at least right now in the game it only gives 10%. And that was generally pretty lackluster. On top of that, it opens up 3 more slots worth of affixes that you can get, like maximum resource to make all of your essence gen even more effective, critical strike chance, cooldown reduction if you still need it. The combination of the chance for Soulrift to deal double damage here and here means you don't have to ever triple masterwork it, and that's the only thing that you can get. You can basically triple it over here, double it over there, and as long as your rolls were high enough in the first place, hit 100%, and then you gain 1 more masterwork. It's a little bit of a benefit of running the 2 weapons. On top of that, it allows us to add on another multiplier. So basically being able to fit in something like Shattered Spirit. If your engine isn't effective enough, you're not going to lose out on damage. For us, we get to use Accelerating and Conceited since we have 100% uptime on Barrier. So this is a huge amount of additional damage we weren't getting before. You might notice I have critical strike gems in here. I completely forgot I need to go put in overpower gems, so you would want rubies in here instead. The other cool part about all of this is that you're able to move Grasping Veins up to the amulet. That 38% crit chance will be able to make it so both Bone Spirit and Soulrift be able to crit 100% of the time, as long as you have uptime on Corpse Tendrils. What that means is that we get a much larger multiplier of damage. This is a 75% crit multi whenever we successfully damage a monster with Corpse Tendrils, moving Sacrificial back down to the gloves where it ultimately should have been in the first place. Again, the change here in the Book of the Dead is swapping over to the Overpower multiplier. So as opposed to the 31% multi for a vulnerable target, we now get a 47% multi whenever we successfully overpower, which is 100% of the time. And like I alluded to, you're basically going to build these boards very similar to what I had before, picking up a ton of damage reduction, maximum resource, maximum resistances if you don't have Tierlist, additional maximum life. But not only is that maximum life going to increase your survivability, it's also now working to increase your damage. Again, adding on the Dominate glyph to be able to gain a huge multiplier of overpower, 70% overpower from Bloodbath. That's absolutely insane. Also being able to pick up a bunch of additive nodes. So like here, we had some additional skill points. So I'm able to pick up very effective, large additive nodes here in case I've maxed out everything else for overpower damage, which again, we get at 100% bonus. Building over into Bloodbath also gets you a huge amount of damage reduction from damage over time effects. So poison effects, those lightning effects, etc. Getting a drastic reduction in overall damage coming out of those things. Other than those primary changes, we basically just get more of an effect out of our Blood Begets Blood, a massive multiplier from Overpower over here, and you just put it all together and you get an insane amount of additional damage. Like, this is now what the build is almost certainly going to look like walking into Season 6. And again, other than the 2 uniques and the 1 mythic unique, which is what you're going to need to push like tier 80 and above pit, like, you don't need any of that damage. You don't even need to do the overpower version until you're at least at tier 85 is when I felt like I was kind of slowing down. But adding on the overpower kit, if you're willing to learn how to do it, it's going to get a massive boost and easily clear out tier 100. The non-overpower version has already cleared tier 100, and Lord Sara has cleared tier 100 on the overpower version of it. I've been playing this thing for about 2 hours and I'm already at tier 98 on it. So like, obviously there's like an insane amount of power to gain here. Now that I've been running the build as an overpower version of it and already seeing like where the potential of it leads out to, like, keep in mind, we're not max on Paragon. We do not currently have like good GAs and masterwork crits across all of our gear. I can't even more than 4 out of 4 masterwork because these things aren't ancestral uniques. So I have an item power 633 on Maker and an item power 640 Blood Moon Breaches, missing a GA on both of these, etc. Where would I now rate the build? Well, unless mercenaries like disproportionately affect the strength of builds, which I assume will happen a little bit, but I generally am making an educated guess that they're going to be like good and activate some systems, but not necessarily like completely warp the meta. I'm now putting this build like at least in the Necromancer solid into S tier. Maybe it ends up at like the top end of A tier when we take into account every other build that exists in the game, because obviously the criteria of your tier list and whether or not you include other classes makes a big difference, right? But with the quality of the gear that I'm restricted to having right now, only a single GA on any one piece, imperfect masterworks, my amulet still says just 3 random stats because I don't have any that actually have passive skills on them at all. Still needing to use stuff like spiked armor and total armor to hit my armor cap because my gear isn't high enough item power. This thing is insanely strong. When talking with Lord Sara, they're already projecting that the damage that I'm currently seeing is probably only about half of what it should be able to do in a perfect world. And I think that there's still a lot of like theory crafting and min-maxing to go into this thing once more people kind of dive into it and we get more brains thinking about it and talking about it. But it gained an incredible amount of power, very fun to play. It's awesome to figure out the little thing where it's like, oh, I just do corpse tendrils a couple times and bada bing, bada boom, all of a sudden I'm overpowering and here we go, and just enjoy my millions and millions and millions of damage. It's probably the most fun build that I've played in a very long time. It's basically everything that I love about Bone Spirit, none of its jankiness, really comparable damage output when you take everything into account. It's amazing amount of survivability. It's a very fluid gameplay, has a lot of wiggle room for in case you mess up. It basically checks all the boxes, and as long as people are willing to come to understand the mechanics of it, they'll be rewarded. But there you go, just a strictly better version of the build that I just showed you yesterday or today, depending on when you see this. Obviously, we're going to be running out of time for the PTR, so I won't be able to test much more, but I definitely think that the Necromancer, as restricted as our skill tree is, and there's still a lot of work to be done, is currently looking at one of the most diverse field of completely viable endgame builds that we've ever seen in a very long time, with a ton of different ways to build all of them. So I'm incredibly hopeful for this season 6. I'm incredibly hopeful for the expansion, and we'll just keep banging the drums of the things that still need to be tweaked a little bit so that the developers don't forget the fact that, like, hey, we are waiting for a truly powerful endgame minion build, etc. I thank you very much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.